Hey everybody. So rather than doing notes over Google Meet, we are going to be doing notes via YouTube, primarily because I do not feel good, and I understand that some of you are also sick because of COVID or something else. So, however, we are going to meet every day at the beginning of class with Google Meet. We'll check in, go over some stuff. That is how I'm going to be taking attendance. And so I expect you to be there at the start of class. So, yeah. Alright, so our objective today, we're going to be continuing examining the role of the judicial branch here in the United States. And more specifically, we are going to focus in on how do Supreme Court justices make decisions on cases. Because, we've already talked about, the setup of our court system. We've talked about how the Supreme Court selects cases. We've talked about how do we even select Supreme Court justices. But what we really haven't looked at is what influences a Supreme Court justice, when they're deciding on a case. Because a Supreme Court justice, they have to explain their decisions, in their written or in their writings. They have to explain their decisions in terms of law. And also on precedent, how past cases have been decided. Okay. However, their main thing that is going to guide them is their judicial philosophy. And that is how, or what guidelines do they use when they are interpreting the Constitution. So, there are two main judicial philosophies that we're going to be looking at today. The first one, they are known as the originalists. Now, originalists believe that the best way to figure out, what the Constitution means today, so how should we interpret the Constitution today, is by simply looking at the original understanding of the people who ratified the Constitution. And they really argue that this approach leads to what we call a fixed meaning. Because you got to think about it. If we're interpreting the Constitution in the same manner for decades, within our judicial system, that's going to bring about stability and predictability. And if we are able to have stability and predictability throughout history, that will mean that our judicial system is more fair. And really, at the end of the day, that will mean that we have more justice. Okay. Now, critics of this approach really have one major argument against originalism. And they say that we can't, always determine what the people, who understood the Constitution at the time, like, how would they think about things today? Because think about it, 200 years ago, the world was very different. We didn't have cars, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have the internet. And so critics of originalism say that it's just simply impractical for views 200 years ago to govern us today. They say that makes no sense. And one of the things that they usually hit on heavily is gun rights against the Second Amendment. How do we interpret the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms? Because opponents of originalism say, at the time of the Constitution, the Founding Fathers only knew of the musket. They didn't know about things such as, weapons that we have today. And they usually attack the AR-15, which you can see pictured there. Alright, so that's originalism. Let's talk next about the other side, which is living constitution. Okay, so if you use living constitution as your guideline for interpreting the Constitution, it's in its name, right? They typically hold that, analyzing or approaching the Constitution from a historical standpoint can't provide all the answers. And when it does not, judges have to apply the values of the Constitution in light of modern circumstances. And so they are going to interpret the Constitution as a living, breathing document. Okay, they argue that the Constitution has to change with the times. One of the big things that they hit on is that, the Constitution, we've used it for over 200 years. And supporters of this philosophy believe that, the meaning of the Constitution has to evolve, and if we aren't able to be flexible, then the Constitution won't last. And so they say that being flexible in how we interpret the Constitution has allowed our Constitution to last for over 200 years. Right? Now, just like with originalism, with the living Constitution, again, we are going to have major critics. Now, the critics of living Constitution, they say that judges who practice living Constitution, it's really an invitation for judges to make up the law. Okay? If the Constitution, if the meaning of the Constitution simply changes over time, then it's not fixed. And therefore, it's not really a law. And they argue that it's just dangerous, and more importantly, it's undemocratic for unelected judges to create the meaning of the Constitution. Okay? They say, if there is a need to change the meaning of the Constitution, originalists believe it's not up to judges to do that. It's up to the legislative branch by simply amending the document. All right. That was a very brief overlook, you guys, into the main two judicial philosophies. We're going to hit on this again tomorrow just to really nail it home because it is very important. To wrap up today, the last part of today should take you no more than 10 minutes. You're going to watch two different Supreme Court justices give their opinion on how they should interpret the Constitution, and then they will also give their reasoning behind it. All right. If you have any questions, you can pull up the Google Meet session. I will still be there throughout the class period, or feel free to email me. But I will see you guys tomorrow.